I want to welcome you all. This is a very exciting moment to be able to offer this doctoral awards program through the Grand Challenges for Social Work. I hope that you're all familiar with what the Grand Challenges for Social Work are. And if you are just learning about them, I hope you'll check out the website where there is a lot of information, both on the history of how we got started and on sort of the background of each of the Grand Challenge issue areas. As you hopefully saw in the guidelines, there will be 13 awards given each year for the 2 years of this grant so far. We do hope to have funding to continue it after that point. But for now, it's a 2-year grant that we received from the New York Community Trust. And there will be 1 award in each of the Grand Challenge issue areas. They will be $3,000 each. There's no variation there. That is across the board. And there is a little bit of guidance on how they can be used, but mostly wanted to make it as open as possible for you all to be able to use them in a way that benefits your program and your success in your program. So with that, I am going to stop talking and stop sharing this lovely welcome screen and turn it over to you all for questions. And you're welcome to put them in the chat. You're welcome to come on camera. You're welcome to raise hands, whatever feels right for where you are. I know people are probably coming in from all over the place. So are there any questions off the bat? Otherwise, I'll just keep talking. All right, I see Catherine with a hand up.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for offering this. My question was about the application form asked us to pick 2 grand challenges to apply to. And so I was wondering if, like, would that be set, like, would we write separate essays that are sort of tailored to why it would be appropriate for each challenge, or should one essay go both directions?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So we wanted to provide an opportunity for folks to identify that their work probably touches on a number of the grand challenges. We know that there's a lot of overlap there. So you might be writing or working on something that very clearly only aligns with one, and then you have a straightforward answer, right? But if you have one that, if your work relates to more than one, I think you can kind of, hopefully kind of condense it into one response that covers both. So that you're not, having to duplicate efforts. If for any reason they're like wildly different and you'd rather submit 2 separate short explanations, you can always send one by email and we can work around it that way. Janine, I hope I said that right.
Yeah, I can. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, clear.
Awesome. So my question is about the application criteria for supposedly anticipating finishing your dissertation by June 30th, 2024. How strict is that deadline? And if there are applicants like coming into this phase kind of unknown, right? It could be 2024, could be 2025. It just depends on how their project unfolds. How will that work? Or are you really looking for people who know for sure their dissertation will be done by that date?
Yeah, that's fair. So there's some flexibility. We did actually hear from someone who very quickly said, we're not done until August. So we are at least extending that kind of program completion date through the end of the summer for anyone whose semesters or whatever wraps up at a different time point. But it's the anticipation that you have made the progress, that it is expected that it will, move forward. So if you aren't sure, or if there's something that could throw you off that path, we won't know that in the moment. It's just if that is in line with what your ideal timeline is, I think it's okay. I don't know if that fully answers it, but if you have a specific scenario you want to talk about, you can reach out to me and we can chat about it.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah. Also, I realized I didn't introduce myself other than my name. I'm the director of the Grand Challenges for Social Work. I got thrown all off script because Rick would normally be here to support me, and he's more of the public speaker than I am, but we work very closely hand in hand, and I've been with the Grand Challenges for about 3 years now, so have a bit under my belt here with the initiative. Other questions?
I have one more, that's okay. You mentioned the funds are sort of they're $3,000 flat. Is there any preference to how the funds are spent? And I'll just say really clearly, I want to spend it on childcare for my summer so that I can actually write and not work. Would that be like acceptable?
Yep, we tried to make it the committee all had thoughts on it and wanted to make it as inclusive and supportive as possible. So basically anything that isn't like legally barred, like legislative efforts, advocacy, that's the only kind of barrier that exists. So I see that question in the chat a bit more. We tried to really limit any restrictions that would be on how you use the funds. So it's really if there's restrictions within your program or what you might be able to do with your activities, those are the restrictions. They aren't coming from us. We are trying to issue it as a blanket stipend, so like you don't have to submit evidence of how it was spent to us or anything like that. So it's really IRS questions. And we do have a lovely tax guru on our committee who can answer some questions about how that process works. And, we tried to make it so that as much of that $3,000 goes to the student as possible. So we skipped the university and it'll go straight to the awardee. And then there are some kind of tax considerations that some things are tax exempt, some things aren't. So, we'll have to work through some of those in the case-by-case submissions. I see a Colleen on camera. There we go.
Question. There are two questions actually. One I put in the chat, but I will not be completing my dissertation proposal until this spring. And so is it okay if the methods or different study parameters change based on adjust slightly based on committee feedback?
Yes.
Okay. And then the other question is, we have an option to do a 3-paper dissertation. So is it okay there may be multiple sub questions under one heading. So I don't know if that's something that's been discussed in the study materials, but it's still one project.
It hasn't come up in the conversations yet. We did try to have representation from both doctoral programs. Here we go. PhD programs and DSW programs so that we understood kind of the dynamics of each of those programs and the work that different schools have you all do. So those sorts of unique things, I think we'll have to, we'll just keep those in our minds as we go through the applications. The rubric that the reviewers will be using will take that into consideration as well. So I wouldn't worry about that too much, but if there's a line you can include that kind of gives that context, that might be helpful. Mariah?
Yes, it's Maria.
Oh,
thank you. My question is, and sorry if this is what you just answered, I just got back in my car, but I'm a DSW student and we do not need to initiate the IRB for any approval because I'm not doing research with human subjects. Am I still able to apply?
yes. And I
Okay.
see Rick has joined me and he's nodding.
I see Rick's,
Yeah.
I just so happen to see Rick in my screen nodding. So,
Yeah.
Okay. And then how would I respond to that prompt or that question?
Yeah. So you'll see it says if applicable. So we tried to recognize that some projects would not need IRB approval, in which case you don't, include a note that says my study does not require IRB approval. I don't know if Rick, you have other thoughts around that.
That's perfect. Yep.
Winnie.
Okay. Thank you.
Is that a clap or a hand up?
I'm sorry, it should be a hand up.
We'll take them both.
We'll take clapping too, either way.
Yeah, right. But I just think it's just for clarification. So does the grant, I hear you say that the grant does not really have parameters on exactly what needs to be covered. But my question is, in case if you're conducting a study outside the United States, does that limit my application, or it's inclusive of whatever? It doesn't really matter where the research is being conducted or whatever you intend to do with the grant.
That's right.
So yeah, it shouldn't be an issue that where your research is taking place. That's no problem.
Let me just say that I'm sorry I'm late, but I'm glad to see all the squares that I can see, and I know there are many more. And just to say that delighted by your interest, and we have tried with the help of our committee to make this as simple as possible by having the grant, the award go to you, so that there's not a lot of complications on your side about how you spend it and where you spend it. So the answer to that question and most other questions would be, that's up to you to, it's between you and your tax collector about what you do with the funds, and we wanted to stay out of that.
And I'm trying to read through some of the questions in the chat as well. So if you see the side of my face, that's why. Can I apply using? Okay, so here's one. Or Bethany, yeah, why don't you go ahead?
So I think my question's quick, and sorry if you've already covered it. Other than anticipated graduation by 2024, do you need any other proof of like that the student has completed comprehensive exams or the proposal submission or any of those criteria?
We tried to leave that between you and your chair to clarify, because we didn't want people to miss the cycle because they couldn't get their 5th committee member to sign on, and then it was going to be December 10th or something. And so instead of doing it that way, we just really want a letter of good faith that says we think this person is going to do it.
Okay, great.
2024, did you say?
Just one thing to add there, although I just completely lost my train of. Oh yeah, the letter only has to be from your primary faculty. So if you saw the guidelines at some point mentioned needing evidence of support from your program chair, and we've dropped that so that program chairs don't get bombarded, and so that you all don't have to go through that extra step. So just support from one of your faculty members on your program.
Is it 2024, Kira?
I'm
looking online too.
I think that is what it's listed as.
Okay, good. All right. That's more time than I had thought, but that's fine.
Thank you.
What percentage of applicants usually end up getting funded? How competitive is this grant? It seems wonderful. This is our first time around, so there are 50 of you on this call, and there will be a few more, I'm sure, on the next call. And there are 13 awards. So let's assume that half of you decide to go forward. That would be, 25. Let's say that overall 50 of you go forward, because there'll be people on the next call. Then you have basically a 1 in 4 chance of being funded, although within some grant challenges, that could be considerably more or less.
Jordan, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you so much. Just a question for you all. What are you looking for in submissions that will that you're hoping to fund, or that you think this grant is specifically for?
Well, one of the characteristics of the grand challenges is that we're hoping to find innovative responses in areas of work that have been somewhat under invested in social work, so emerging areas. So, but it's also a commitment to strengthen society through science. So we're interested in good science. We're interested in a good fit with the grand challenges overall, and then with any specific grand challenge that you could match up with. And the New York Community Trust is very clear that they want these studies as much as possible to benefit people in the community through ideas that can generate, that can be replicated or taken to scale. You obviously can't take your dissertations to scale, but they're interested in ideas that will, reverberate and will lead to policy change or practice change or some kind of community benefit. Kira, anything you think I missed there?
I don't think so. But there was a question in the chat, and that it kind of builds on that, of how competitive, which grand challenges might be most competitive. And, it's our first time, so we're not sure. But, I think we know that there's been a lot of interest in the Eliminate Racism Grand Challenge. That is, a newer grand challenge, and folks are really excited to see that added. So taking a look at all of the grand challenges and thinking about which domains are most common in social work might give you a hint, but that's our best guess.
Yeah.
Shalita? Oops, sorry, Rick.
No, I'm good.
Hi, thank you. So I have a question about being eligible to apply. So my school only has a public affairs program that it's an interdisciplinary program with social work as one of the tracks. There's no individual social work PhD program. So I just wanted to know if someone like me would still be eligible to apply. My committee members are mostly social workers. We have a social work track coordinator that works with the public affairs program. So I just wasn't sure if that would be okay, or if the program has to specifically be under the School of Social Work.
So you're in a school of public affairs, and there's a department of social work, or not even?
No, so the PhD program is public affairs, and it has specific tracks. So there's criminology, social work, health management. And so our individual departments are a part of that PhD program, but there's no individual social work PhD program. So I'm involved with the department, but they are not the ones heading my program.
That's that seems reasonable. We're not trying to, we are trying to exclude some folks. We don't necessarily want someone who's because of the limitations in the New York Community Trust interest, we don't necessarily want someone who's in economics but is doing work on the economics of behavioral health. We do want someone who's aligned with social work and likely to contribute to the social work pipeline. So I don't see any, I would think that you're clarifying that in an application and indicating what your objectives are in terms of what you might do after your degree would be sufficient.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? I'm going back through the chat. Tasha, yeah.
Hey, I just had a question regarding, I know you guys have a list in the document of what you're looking for in terms of criteria from the applications. Is there any preference towards what the funding is used for? I know you mentioned earlier that it's really wide open, but is there anything, just thinking about the trust fund too, that you guys have talked about their priorities that you might prefer to see?
Well, I don't think the committee has a strong preference. We talked about this quite a bit. Our view is, we know that some people will use this for subject fees because those are hard to get, and that has definitely has a social work ring to it because you're engaging people from the community, often from disadvantaged groups, to be in your study, and you're honoring them with some something of a payment. But then other people raise the question of, well, what if I can't even get out to do a focus group because I have issues about childcare and I need to bring someone in to do childcare? And we were like, well, again, that's something that you would have to figure out. And so I think it should be resonant with what you plan to do. So if you need childcare or you need transportation, that's fine. If you want to use this for subject fees, that's very straightforward. But I don't think that's going to be a strong criteria. I don't think that there's going to be much weight given to that, as long as there's some explanation. And we're not even asking for a detailed budget, but just some explanation of what you think you might do with funds.
Thank you.
There was a question in the chat and I answered it there, but just for the sake of anyone who joined afterwards, there was questions around kind of the timing. So the application deadline is the 9th. We are anticipating letting awardees know by February. But the funding transfer process, which many of you may know how systems work, might take a little while. So our finance office has said to let everyone know that it could take up to 2 months from the time you find out that you were awarded and turn in all of the, paperwork and things that we need to get those funds to you. But we will do everything we can to move it fast.
I think that's sort of an outside number. I think there shouldn't take more than a month or so, but it depends on a lot of things, I guess. The scoring evaluation of applications. What would tip the committee towards one application versus another if they were scored the same? So yeah, we haven't, we have a committee that's working on that part of it. That's going to be figuring out more about just how that's going to be done. I think at this point, all I could say would be somewhat advisory, and it could change with the committee, but we are looking for, as with many activities in social work, we are looking for diversity in terms of not only the topics, the 13 grand challenges, but also the makeup of who receives the awards. So I do think that if there was a tie, that it might go to someone from a smaller, less resourced school. It might go to someone who had been more deeply involved in some activity related to this, or had might seem to have a greater chance of having an impact as a result of the study. But we hope that everybody gets a perfect score and that we really have to struggle with this question, but we haven't really struggled with it yet. Additional funding sources that may be useful if we're not awarded this grant. So yes, I mean, there are the usual doctoral awards from NIH and Department of Justice, and CDC sometimes has awards. The Children's Bureau used to have some doctoral awards, but they don't have much anymore. Maybe that will change with new funding that's coming through. But no, I really don't. We don't have any real pipeline into any of the particular grant challenges. Although some of the networks have local foundations that have supported them. And that would be a question then for the network leads as well, who you're free to reach out to regardless of this competition. just to say, you know, I work in smart decarceration and I want to do this kind of study. Do you have any idea of foundations or donors who would be excited about this? But that's probably the most that I could tell you. Is the award open to international students? Yes. Yes, it is. Yep. You'd have to fill out a W-9, and that's about it.
And we are just confirming that, and if there's any extra paperwork or something that would be required for the finance office, but we haven't heard that that's the case yet.
Yes, we have 2 rounds of funding for the question that came from Leanne. So we'll be doing this again next year. And there's a hope. The New York Community Trust is a conglomeration of several smaller foundations, Fosbeck and Silverman and a few other New York foundations that were invested in social work. And there used to be a Fosbeck dissertation award about clinical research, and it got folded in here. So for a few years now, they've been sitting on money that used to go to PhD awards through the Fosbeck mechanism. I don't think the Fosbeck mechanism is going to come back. I think they're hoping, the New York Community Trust that is hoping that this will be successful and that they'll have a new mechanism to fund social work, doctoral work in the future. So if we have 2 good years or even 1.5 good years, because we won't really know of the result of the second one, then we certainly have every intention and every hope that this would continue. For those of you who just don't want to give up your doctoral careers because they're so much fun, you could apply for this for years to come. That's our hope. Did we exhaust you?
Yes, I see a hand up. Yafan? Did I
Yes.
say it right?
So yes, that's correct. So do I have to use our dissertation research to apply, or what route can be considered as a capstone project besides dissertation?
You do both? No.
No. So right now I have like another study, which is not my dissertation, but I'm actually, so I just don't know whether that counts as a capstone project.
Okay. We say you could do either. So I do think you have to bend whatever other work you're doing into one or the other if you want to fund that. If you want to do something else and try to figure out how to move that forward on your own, that's fine. But it does have to be, you do have to get sign off from your chair of either if it's the final capstone project, should be your final project. So the most sizable thing, most rigorous thing you do, whether that's a capstone or a dissertation. If you're, that's how I would think of it.
Thank you.
There's a question in the chat. Are we able to get this award concurrent with other awards, or would we have to decline other awards if we are chosen for this? I'm looking at Rick. We haven't talked about it, but I think we have no requirements that you'd have to give up any other funding.
No. We hope you just pile those funds right on top of each other.
Absolutely. And yeah, there was another question around whether you have to be a full-time student. No, there's no requirement for that.
So one of the things that Kira and I talked a little bit in preparation for this call was, so as we wrote the statement, we're looking for scholars who are and practitioners who are going to help fulfill the mission of the Grand Challenges. But the review process is going to go through each of the networks. So you're going to check off 1 or 2 different grand challenges that you're interested in, and then those will go to those networks. So although we didn't heavily emphasize it in the application, you need to write this with some attention to what the networks, the topics of the each of the grand challenges. And we won't be able to tell you, we don't know. And so it's sort of blind review. It's not clear who from the networks will be the reviewers. It won't necessarily be the current network leads, could be others that are brought in. But just to say, yes, of course, you want to clarify that this is concordant with the mission of the grand challenges, but also be attentive to the interests and activities of the networks. And some of those are a little challenging to get a handle on. If you read, for example, the first Grand Challenges book, and then the second Grand Challenges book, the topics within a network could shift, considerably even. And so you'll have to do your best to get a feel for, and it's like writing an NIH grant from that standpoint. You try to figure out who the study section is, who the likely reviewers are, who you should cite, what you should be thinking about with regard to the fit between what you're doing and the grand challenge.
And there was a question earlier for anyone who joined a little late. So if you go through the application form, there is an opportunity to select 1 or 2 of the grand challenges that your work most closely aligns with. And the question was, when writing to that question around how your work aligns, if you select 2, do you submit 2 separate statements on how it relates to each one, or can you kind of integrate them? And I think in a lot of ways, it's up to you and how you feel about your work. I think there are some projects that might very closely align with 2 interwoven in between. And there's others where it's, it really identifies with this, but this could be a secondary one. So only submit 1 statement, but try to address that within that 1 statement. Is the recording of this going to be available? We hadn't talked about that. I mostly was recording it for my own sake so that we could take your questions and add them to our FAQ and make sure we captured any that we weren't able to answer today. But we'll think about we'll think about that if it can be made public.
That makes sense.
Thank you. I have a question on the topic. My dissertation looks like fit in the challenge on isolation. But when I check, my question is, how do you define that? I'm not sure my isolation fits with that isolation. When I look at more detail, there was no definition. Maybe that's apparent. My topic would be on the isolated experience on policies of people who had leprosy. It's, yeah.
Wow, great, amazing topic. So hard to answer that, except to say by looking at the writings of the 2 book chapters, the original working paper. So each of the grand challenges had a working paper or 2. Social isolation and health is definitely connected. A lot of this came out of work on gerontology, but there's also been work done around adolescent isolation and the isolation of, So I don't know that there's been much on isolation caused by infectious diseases, but that's certainly a pretty relevant topic given, although I don't think of leprosy as being the problem that it once was. Certainly, with COVID-19 and all these other infectious diseases around, it's an important current topic. I'm sure there are lessons to be learned from that. And so that's about the best we can do, is reading the work of some of the network leads and those, the working papers, the book chapters, and on the website, there's a link for each of the grand challenges to some of the other work that they've been involved with.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mhm. Let's see. Anyone else?
Answered. We've exhausted all questions.
One of the other things that Kira and I talked about was, so the grand challenges, when we got together to identify the 12 grand challenges, we had this long process. And some of the major topics in our profession didn't end up being grand challenges. So Kira and I are both child welfare people, if you will. And there's no grand challenge around child welfare. At the time, there was some national work being done on child welfare as a wicked problem, but it didn't necessarily get translated into child welfare as a grand challenge. I would say the same is true to some extent around behavioral health, addiction, mental health. There's Close the Health Gap, and those are a form of health. There's issues around equity. There's issues around promoting healthy development. Certainly behavioral health issues are part of stopping family violence. So there are places to connect, but there aren't mainstream grand challenges in those two areas. And so this may not be the place to try to pursue that, but if you do, you're going to need to figure out, and in a sincere way, how would you change your study or adapt what you're doing to really inform or engage with the topics of these other topics that are not child welfare or not behavioral health. I think the committee had the feeling that there were more resources and more work being done in those areas. That doesn't mean there's ever enough funding or enough work being done, but it's just a comment to set some expectations, I think, around some of our biggest areas and most important areas in social work and doctoral research may not be a perfect fit to this. Well, we're very pleased by all the interest and hope that you'll continue to send us questions, and we'll, as we can, respond to you and then also reformat them to add to our frequently asked questions if we think they're of broader interest. So this process will be ongoing, and as Kira mentioned, I'm sure in her intro, we're having another session next week.
I didn't mention it, so.
Oh, you didn't? Oh, okay.
Well, I figured, here you all are. You found it, but we do, yeah, certainly join again next week if more questions come up, or I know a number of you have reached out by email, so that is always an option as well between sessions.
So thank you all, and best wishes on this really exciting time and pursuit. There's getting a doctorate is one of the most challenging and fun and lasting things you can do. So having gotten mine a good while ago, I never have any doubt it was one of the best decisions I made.